Good morning, Hayom Yom, Vuv Sivan, the first day of Shavous. So on the holiday of Shavous, we are celebrating the fact that us Jews received the Torah. So it's a very special day. But because of that, on the first day of Shavous, in the Torah reading, in the fourth reading, we read about the Ten Commandments, the Toras Menachem. And the Rebbe tells us that when the Ten Commandments are being read, everybody in the shul should stand up and everybody should face the Baal Shem Tov. Now, most Ashkenazim, in fact, I think all Ashkenazim, have the custom that before the Ten Commandments are read, they read an introduction. They read a small piyut, a small tefillah, which is known as the Akdamos prayer. And it was written by an Ashkenazi rabbi in the 11th century. And there's actually a very wild story how this prayer was written. But in any event, he wrote this prayer as an introduction to the Ten Commandments. And most Ashkenazim read it. But the Rebbe tells us that it is the Lubavitch custom not to read the Akdamos prayer before Kriya on Shavous. Now this is very interesting because the Rebbe shared once how he had heard from his father-in-law, from the Frieidker Rebbe, that the Frieidker Rebbe said he's not sure why in Lubavitch they didn't say the Akdamos, why it wasn't our custom to say it. In fact, in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, he brings it down and it just sounds like we would say it, but for whatever reason in Lubavitch it wasn't said, and the Frieidker Rebbe said he's not even sure why, and he feels like it's possible that his father, the Rebbe Rashab, even wanted them to say it. Just the Rebbe Rashab would never interfere with the way the shul was being run, the way the Gabayim were running the shul, and therefore since the Gabayim weren't having Akdamos be said, he didn't interfere. But he feels like his father, Rebbe Rashab, actually wanted them to say it. And then on another occasion, it was at the Shavous meal, and somebody said to the Rebbe, or somebody said at the table, that they had heard from the Rebbe that the Rebbe's own father, Rebbe Levi Yitzchak, the Lubavitch Rebbe's father, he himself used to say Akdamos. And the man said that he heard that people say that the Rebbe himself says Akdamos. And the Rebbe responded that generally by Chabad Hasidim we do not say Akdamos, but in Yekaterinoslav, where his father was from, where Rebbe Levi Yitzchak was from, there they would say Akdamos. But generally Chabad Hasidim do not say Akdamos. Then the man pushed the issue and he said, "What about you? Do you say Akdamos?" And the Rebbe said, "Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, a man came to the Rogatchover Goyim, was one of the most brilliant human beings to live in the last 1,000 years. And he came to the Rogatchover and he asked him, "Do you put on Rashi's tefillin or Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin? Because all of us have a doubt who's right. Is Rashi right or Rabbeinu Tam right? Therefore, we put on both. But you're a smart man, you probably figured it out, so you know who's right. So do you put on Rashi's tefillin or Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin?" And the Rogatchover told him, he said, "Petach," which means fool, "if you would ask me a halachic question, then I would feel compelled, I feel like it was my duty to respond. But if you're asking me a personal question, I don't feel inclined or compelled at all to respond to you, and I'm not going to respond to you." And the Rebbe basically left it at that and said, "Okay, fine." Now, one time, though, the Rebbe said a public sicha, and the Rebbe publicly explained why, in fact, he feels that it is the Lubavitch custom not to say Akdamos on Shavous, and it also kind of explains why the Rebbe himself personally would say Akdamos. And he said that in Lubavitch, everything we demand that you do, we demand that you do it to the full measure. You're fully involved, you're fully present in everything you do. Everything you do is meant to be a powerful experience. We don't just do things stam. Anything we're saying to do, you have to do it all the way. Or at least we demand that you do it all the way. Not everyone does, but Lubavitch demands everything we ask you to do, we ask you to do all the way 100%. And he said the Akdamos prayer, if you read the words, is describing at great length and in very powerful terms, it's describing the many spiritual universes and worlds and angels and spiritual beings and worlds that God has created. And he said, if you really, really focus on the words and you're really paying attention and it's a powerful prayer, basically, he said, your mind would be blown by this prayer. And it would become the highlight of Shavous. It's such a powerful prayer, it's such an amazing prayer, you would become so blown away by the words you're reading, and that would become such a powerful spiritual experience, the prayer, that it would become the highlight of Shavous. And he said there would be a danger of you missing out on the whole point of Shavous. You get so caught up in Akdamos and the spirit of Akdamos and the message of Akdamos and the scenes that Akdamos is painting that you would miss what Shavous is really all about. And instead, the highlight of Shavous would turn into the Akdamos prayer when that's a very powerful thing in Shavous, but that's not the point of Shavous. And he said, other communities that don't study Hasidus, that don't have the Lubavitch approach of Chabad, so he said, for them it's not a problem to say Akdamos because they read the words, they don't even get what they're saying. But he says, someone who really studies Chassidus, somebody who connects with everything you do in a way that Chassidus, that Lubavitch demands, he said, Akdamos would pose a great danger of missing the point of Shavous. Because the point of Shavous is the marriage between the Jewish people and Hashem. It's where the Etzem HaNeshama is meant to connect with Atmos. It's when we're meant to block out all the outside noise, all the distractions in the world, not just physical distractions, but even spiritual distractions, and focus on what really matters. Just see Hashem Himself and connect with Hashem's essence, with Hashem's core, and that's what Shavous is all about. And he said, therefore, getting caught up in all kinds of spiritual experiences, and even very powerful spiritual experiences, that misses the point. We're getting caught up in noise, even spiritual noise, and missing the point, missing Hashem Himself, missing the man himself. And the Rebbe explained this based on a famous parable, a famous mashal that the Baal Shem Tov told us. The Baal Shem Tov said, there was once a very, very poor man who came from the slums, who had an audience with the king in the palace. And when he comes into the palace, he says, there's a great danger that's going on, because when he comes into the palace, he's going to be blown away by what he's seeing. When he sees all the gold, all the paintings, all the food, all the ministers, everyone dressed the way they are, it's going to be so impressive. He'll be so taken in, he'll be so blown away that he might just stop where he is and spend all of his time in the first rooms of the palace. And in fact, he might even think that this is it. He heard about the king and everything, and now he shows up and he sees such magnificence, such glory, such wealth that only aristocracy could display, that he might even think this is the king. And he'll just hang out there and be blown away by how lucky he is that he got to meet the king, he got to see this all. And he said he'll never even make it to the real king. He'll never make it to the throne room. He'll never meet the king. He'll never have his audience, which is way beyond any of this. And he says in the same way, basically, that it's possible in Judaism to get lost, to get distracted in many positive spiritual things, but to kind of miss the point. And we need to always stay focused. We need to keep our eye on the ball. We need to stay focused on Hashem, on Atzmos, on Mashiach. And that's why we don't say Akdamos on Shavous. Okay, so those are the two laws the Rebbe tells us. Then the Rebbe continues and he says that today, Vuv Shavous, is the anniversary, the first day of Shavous, is the Vuv Sivan, the first day of Shavous, is the anniversary of the passing of the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov passed away today, Vuv Sivan, on a Wednesday in the year 1760, on the first day of Shavous, in the town of Mezhebush, which is a small town in Ukraine, a 4.5-hour drive from Kiev. And it's actually not so clear when the Baal Shem Tov was laid to rest. He was buried in Mezhebush, but it's not so clear on what day they buried him. It could either be the first day of Shavous, the second day of Shavous. Some sources even say Isru Chag, the day after Shavous. So that's a major source of debate, and that's not so clear. But he passed away on Wednesday on the first day of Shavous. Now, till today, it's widely believed, and it was always widely believed, that the Baal Shem Tov actually passed away on Thursday, the second day of Shavous, on Zayin Sivan. And one time, the Frieidker Rebbe was farbraying, and a Jew at the table, shared how by the Jews of Volin, they have a tradition that the Baal Shem Tov passed away on Wednesday on the first day of Shavous. And he said they even find an allusion to this in the words of Chazal, in the Gemara. The Gemara says that on the fourth day of creation, on the first Wednesday of creation, the first Wednesday of human history, so it says that's the day Shenitlu Hama'eris, which means the great lights, the sun and the moon, were suspended into the sky. And he said this is an allusion to the great light of the Baal Shem Tov, which passed away on Wednesday. And when he said that, the Frieidker Rebbe said, "Thank you for saying that. Now I understand a very famous story of the Alter Rebbe, which is that nearly 38 years after the passing of the Baal Shem Tov, in the year 1798, so the Alter Rebbe was famously arrested for spreading Hasidus. And on Yutes Kislev, he was released, and it's one of the highlights of the Hasidic calendar. It's one of the biggest, it was a massive celebration at the time. It's a massive celebration till today. The Alter Rebbe was freed, he was released, and the Hasidim at the time were going crazy. And they were doing somersaults and tumble sauces in the streets of Petersburg, which is where the Alter Rebbe had been arrested. And the Frieidker Rebbe says that when the Alter Rebbe saw the reaction of the Hasidim, he said it became very, very frightened. He was very scared that the Hasidim were not reacting in the appropriate way. And he was frightened, he said, that they were kind of going to miss the opportunity and miss the point of what the moment was all about, and get caught up in distractions and totally miss the point. And therefore, he says, on the next day, on Chos Kislev, which was a Wednesday, so after davening, he says, the Alter Rebbe sat down, and the Alter Rebbe shared the following. He says, on the fourth day of creation, about the fourth day of creation, the first Wednesday in human history, so the pasuk says, Yihi HaMa'eris, God made lights in the sky. And the word ma'eres, the word for lights or luminaries, is deficient. It's missing a letter. It's spelled without a vav. And there's many different interpretations of what this means, why it's written in this weird way without a vav. But he said the way some Mefarshim explain it is that it's alluding to the fact that on the first 3 days of creation, on the first Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, so the lights were at full strength. But on the first Wednesday, the lights became deficient. The moon, famously, the moon was diminished, because originally the moon was just as powerful, just as bright as the sun, but it became diminished, it became smaller, and that's why the moon doesn't shine as brightly as the sun anymore. So it says there was lights in the sky, but they were ma'eres, they were missing, they were lacking of vav, they had been diminished. And he says this is the deeper meaning of what Chazal say, that on the fourth day, nitlu ha'ma'eres, the lights were suspended into the sky, because the word nitlu, so the way it's spelled in Gemara, it's spelled with a taf, which means the lights were suspended. But the same pronunciation, nitlu, could be spelled with a tes, in which case it would mean the lights were taken away, the lights were diminished. So he said, really, the way you're meant to read it is, on the fourth day, nitlu ha'ma'eres. The lights were diminished, the moon had become diminished, the moon had become smaller. But he said, what the Gemara is telling us is, the moon had a very interesting response. When the moon became diminished, when it had less light than it ever had, its response was to give more light than it had ever been giving. Because till the fourth day, the moon was not suspended in the sky. And on the fourth day, when the lights got a hit, when the moon had been diminished, the moon's response was nitlu ha'ma'eres, to go up into the sky to start giving light to the world. And he said, in the exact same way, said the Alter Rebbe, the 3 lights of the 3 days of light, the 3 days of brightness, the 3 days of incredible brightness, that corresponds to the Baal Shem Tov, to the Magid, and then he trailed off, but he meant me, myself, the Alter Rebbe, the 3rd light. And he said, but on Wednesday, nitlu ha'ma'eres. On Wednesday, the lights, the Rebbeim got a hit, which means that which now the Frieidker Rebbe understood was alluding to the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov passed away. We lost the Baal Shem Tov, so to speak. The Baal Shem Tov became concealed on Wednesday, and this brilliant light, this brilliant radiance that the Rebbeim are got a hit. But he said the response to nitlu ha'ma'eres, the response to the hit, the response to the loss of the Baal Shem Tov, to the concealment of the Baal Shem Tov, has to be nitlu ha'ma'eres. We now have to start giving and pumping out more light than we've ever given. We have to start spreading the Baal Shem Tov, spreading the Chassidus, spreading the light of Chassidus, which gives clarity to everything, that's why it's called light, spreading the light and gift of Chassidus to the entire world. Even though we've lost the Baal Shem Tov, the way to reconnect with the Baal Shem Tov, the way to reclaim the Baal Shem Tov, the way to bring Mashiach is to spread Chassidus, is nitlu ha'ma'eres. And he said, we have Chassidus, but it all depends on you. And he pointed to the Chassidim. He said, everything depends on you guys. You can't just sit back now and party. You have a mission now to start spreading Chassidus. And very famously, the Rebbeim said many, many times that the real campaign of fulfilling the Baal Shem Tov's vision of spreading Chassidus really began right then, on that day, on Chav Kislev. Until today, we are on that campaign. We are still waging that war. We are still trying to spread Chassidus and make Chassidus infiltrate every last place in the world and every last mind and heart. So God bless you and have a wonderful, wonderful day.